The organic bridge of the Zephyrin warship, Inevitable Conquest, pulsed with an otherworldly glow. Living consoles breathed and shifted beneath the six-fingered hands of their operators. Commander Zelfax Prime 7 stood rigid, his exoskeleton glittering under the ambient bioluminescence as he reviewed the holographic projection of the planet below. "Earth," he pronounced, the translator implant in his throat clicking as it formed the alien word. Classification: Primitive. Technology level: 3.2. Conquest. Priority: Medium-low. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Vextrix, approached with the characteristic fluid motion of her species. Her skin rippled with patterns of submission as she addressed her superior. "The conquest sequence has been initiated. Commander, the Vorak drop pod is prepared. Calthorn awaits your final authorization." Commander Zelfax's upper eyes narrowed while his lower set remained fixed on the planet's slowly rotating image. "Curious," he muttered. "The intelligence suggests these humans have split the atom, yet they've made no meaningful ventures beyond their atmosphere. Their weapons remain chemical in nature. Their societies are fractious. A perfect candidate for the Vorak Protocol," Lieutenant Vextrix affirmed. "One apex predator should be sufficient to establish dominance. The statistical models predict capitulation within 14 solar cycles." Zelfax waved a limb dismissively. "Proceed with deployment. I want hourly updates on Calthorn's progress. The Emperor expects this world's resources cataloged and prepared for extraction by the next grand alignment." As the command was relayed through the ship's neural network, deep within the vessel's armored bowels, a massive chamber hummed with anticipation, suspended in nutrient fluid. A creature stirred. Calthorn, the pride of Zephyrin bioengineering, opened eyes designed to see in spectrums beyond human comprehension. The creature's consciousness activated fully as information flooded its enhanced brain. Earth, topography, atmosphere, dominant species characteristics, gravity, temperature ranges, all data necessary for the hunt. Calthorn's body, 9 feet of corded muscle, adaptive camouflage skin, and retractable bone weapons, tensed as the fluid drained. The drop pod around it sealed, becoming both transport and temporary base of operations. "Deployment in 3, 2, 1, came the automated voice. The pod shot from the ship, streaking through Earth's atmosphere, a falling star carrying conquest. Maxine Vega, known to everyone simply as Max, stood ankle-deep in a frigid Colorado stream, carefully recording water quality data on her tablet. At 25, she hardly looked the part of a serious graduate student in environmental science. Her dark hair was pulled into a practical but messy bun. Her hiking boots were well worn, and her field jacket was patched in multiple places. "Temperature holding at 42.6 degrees Fahrenheit, she muttered to herself, making a note. Slightly higher than last month's reading. A notification pinged on her device. Her thesis advisor, Dr. Reyes, had sent another email marked urgent. Max sighed, knowing without opening it that it would contain another barely veiled demand for preliminary results. She'd chosen to study invasive species' impact on high-altitude ecosystems, but 6 months in, her findings were frustratingly inconclusive. Max pocketed the tablet and trudged back to shore, where her small research cabin perched on the mountainside. The isolation suited her. It was just her, the research, and occasional supply runs to the small town 30 miles downslope. To fund her studies, she worked part-time as a barista at the town's only coffee shop, the Grizzly Bean, where the locals had come to appreciate her encyclopedic knowledge of brew methods almost as much as her ability to listen to their stories. As she approached her cabin, Max glanced at the darkening sky. A storm was rolling in over the mountains, but something about the clouds seemed off. One particular formation was moving against the wind, descending rapidly. "That's not weather," she whispered, reaching for her binoculars. The object, metallic and organic looking at once, streaked across the sky and disappeared behind a ridge approximately 5 miles north. The impact shook the ground beneath her feet, and a flock of startled birds erupted from the tree line. Max's first instinct was to call the authorities, but reception was spotty at best in these mountains. Her second thought was that this could be exactly what her research needed, an external event affecting the ecosystem in real time. Whatever had crashed could introduce foreign elements into the environment. If she documented the changes from the beginning, it could salvage her thesis. Decision made. Max quickly gathered her field kit, sample containers, camera, tablet, first aid supplies, water, energy bars, and, almost as an afterthought, the thermos of premium dark roast she'd brewed that morning. If she was going to be out late investigating, she'd need the caffeine. As she shouldered her backpack and locked the cabin, the seismic sensors she'd placed around her research area began transmitting data to her tablet. The impact registered as a 3.4 on the Richter scale, significant enough to alert authorities eventually. But in this remote area, she'd likely be the first responder. Max had no way of knowing that her curiosity was leading her directly toward the most dangerous predator the galaxy had ever engineered. Or that by morning, the fate of her planet would rest in her hands. Calthorne emerged from the smoldering drop pod, skin already shifting to match the mottled browns and greens of the Colorado forest. The apex predator inhaled deeply, sensitive nostrils cataloging thousands of unfamiliar scents. Oxygen levels were within acceptable parameters, though slightly higher than optimal. Gravity was heavier than the Zephyrin homeworld, a minor inconvenience that the creature's enhanced musculature would compensate for within hours. The mission parameters scrolled through Calthorne's consciousness: explore, evaluate, terrorize, subjugate. The proven methodology of countless conquests. Strike fear into the dominant species. Demonstrate their helplessness. Accept their surrender. Prepare for the arrival of the fleet. Simple, efficient, inevitable. Calthorne began a systematic survey of the immediate area, collecting biological samples and assessing potential threats. The local fauna registered as minimal danger, nothing that could match Vorak's speed, strength, or tactical intelligence. The predator moved with impossible silence through the underbrush, pausing occasionally to taste the air or examine a plant. Reaching a vantage point atop a boulder, Calthorne extended sensory tendrils, feeling the vibrations of the forest. Something was approaching, bipedal, relatively small, moving with purpose rather than panic. The first human. The predator settled into perfect stillness, adaptive camouflage rendering it nearly invisible against the stone and vegetation. This would be an opportunity to observe before engaging. The Zephyrin military protocols recommended gathering intelligence on behavior patterns before initiating the terror phase. Max followed her tablet's GPS coordinates toward the impact site, recording observations as she hiked. The forest seemed unusually quiet. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals. Only the whisper of wind through pine needles accompanied her footsteps. Local wildlife appears to have evacuated the immediate area, she dictated into her recorder. Possible response to seismic event or something else. The trek took longer than expected, the terrain becoming increasingly difficult as she approached the ridge. When she finally crested a steep incline, Max stopped short. Before her lay a small crater, and within it, something that defied easy categorization. It resembled a seed pod. If seeds were 20 feet long and made of some iridescent material that seemed simultaneously metallic and organic. Parts of it appeared to be breathing. Definitely not a meteorite, Max whispered, automatically reaching for her camera. She snapped several photos, then cautiously approached the edge of the crater. The pod had split open, revealing an empty interior chamber. Something had emerged. A normal person might have retreated at this point, called in the military or at least the local sheriff. But Max's scientific curiosity overrode her caution. Whatever had been inside could be hurt, confused, or her academic mind raced with possibilities, an unprecedented research opportunity. She scanned the surrounding area for tracks or signs of movement. At the far edge of the crater, she noticed disturbed earth and broken vegetation. Something large had moved in that direction. Max checked her watch. 2 hours of daylight remained. Enough time to follow the trail a short distance and perhaps catch a glimpse of whatever visitor had arrived on Earth. She could always return to her cabin before dark and contact authorities then. Decision made. She adjusted her backpack and began following the trail, unaware that she was being observed and that the hunter had just become the hunted. Calthorne watched the human female with growing curiosity. Her behavior did not match the expected response patterns. There was no fear, no panic, only methodical investigation. The predator's instincts suggested two possibilities. Either the human was exceptionally brave, or she did not recognize danger when confronted with it. Either way, she would serve as an excellent first subject. The Vorak shifted position silently, moving to intercept the human's path. Conquest began with demonstration, showing the primitive species their vulnerability. The psychological impact of a single, calculated attack would spread through their communication networks, preparing the way for broader subjugation. Max pushed through a dense patch of undergrowth and emerged into a small clearing. She paused to consult her tablet, confirming she was still following the trail correctly. The stillness of the forest was becoming unnerving, even to her scientific mind. "I know you're out there," she called suddenly, surprising herself. "I'm not here to harm you. I just want to understand what happened." The words seemed to hang in the air, absorbed by the silent trees. Max felt foolish. Whatever had emerged from the pod was likely an inanimate object, or perhaps some automated probe. Yet something about the perfect stillness of the forest suggested a presence. She unclipped her thermos, deciding a shot of caffeine might sharpen her senses. As she poured the dark liquid into the thermos cup, the rich aroma of coffee spread through the clearing. Calthorne's sensory organs detected the unfamiliar chemical compound immediately. The scent was complex, organic, with notes that the predator's extensive biological database could not categorize. Not a weapon, at least not one known to Zephyrin intelligence. Intrigued and cautious, the Vorak decided to initiate contact rather than attack immediately. Intelligence gathering remained a mission priority. With fluid grace, Calthorne decamouflaged, revealing its true form at the edge of the clearing. Max nearly dropped her thermos. The creature before her stood nearly 9 feet tall, with a humanoid body structure that diverged into alien territory with every detail. Its skin shifted colors like a cuttlefish, settling into a pattern of muted greens and browns, with occasional pulses of bioluminescent blue. 4 arms extended from a torso protected by natural armor plates. The face, if it could be called that, featured multiple sensory organs, arranged around what appeared to be breathing apertures. No visible mouth. Yet somehow Max sensed it could communicate. Her scientific mind exploded with questions, even as her survival instinct screamed for her to run. Remarkably, curiosity won. "Hello," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "My name is Maxine Vega. I'm a researcher." She gestured to her tablet and equipment. "I study ecosystems, life forms, and how they interact." Calthorne processed the human's vocalizations, the translation matrix in its enhanced brain, decoding the primitive language with ease. The creature's reaction was unexpected. The terror response was notably absent. "You are not afraid," Calthorne stated, the words forming without a visible mouth, transmitted through modulated air vibrations. Max flinched at the sound, like whispered words formed by rushing wind. "I'm terrified, actually," she admitted with surprising honesty. But I'm also fascinated. Are you from the pod that crashed? The Predator took a step forward, noting how the human stood her ground, despite the minute physiological signs of fear. Elevated heart rate, perspiration, dilated pupils. I am Calthorn, Vorik-class apex predator, emissary of the Zephyrin Empire. Your world has been selected for conquest. Max blinked several times, processing this information. Her academic mind immediately began breaking down the implications, while the part of her that had watched too many science fiction movies as a teenager supplied helpful panic. That's direct, she finally managed. Would you like some coffee while we discuss this conquest thing? Now it was Calthorn's turn to experience confusion. The response did not align with any predicted behavioral model. The human was offering a beverage while being informed of planetary subjugation. The Predator's programming momentarily stalled, caught between conquest protocols and first contact procedures. Coffee? The alien finally asked. It's what I'm drinking. Max held up her thermos cup. It's a plant-based stimulant humans consume. Helps us think. Totally harmless to us. Though I can't speak for your biology. Calthorn's sensory tendrils extended slightly, analyzing the compound from a distance. Your offer of chemical sustenance during a conquest announcement suggests either extreme hospitality or a misunderstanding of your situation. Max shrugged, the casual gesture hiding her racing thoughts. Maybe both. Where I come from, we talk through things before jumping to conquest. Call it a human quirk. Something about the human's demeanor disrupted Calthorn's programmed responses. The conversation was not proceeding according to protocol. Yet the information exchange had potential value. The Predator decided to adapt. I will observe this ritual, Calthorn announced, moving closer with fluid grace that belied its massive size. Max forced herself to remain still as the alien approached. She poured a second cup of coffee from her thermos and extended it with a hand that only slightly trembled. Calthorn took the cup with surprising delicacy, using one of its smaller secondary limbs. The Predator had no conventional mouth, but somehow absorbed a small amount of the liquid through a permeable patch on what might be considered its throat. The effect was immediate. Calthorn's sensory organs flared, and its skin rippled with patterns of surprise. This substance contains stimulants and complex flavor compounds, the alien observed. Your species willingly consumes this? Multiple times daily for some of us, Max confirmed, taking a sip from her own cup. I personally can't function without it in the morning. Fascinating. Your biochemistry must be remarkably resilient. Max smiled despite herself. You should see what we do with alcohol. The unlikely pair stood in the clearing, sharing coffee as the sun began its descent behind the mountains. For a brief, surreal moment, it felt almost like a normal field research encounter to Max, if one ignored that her research subject was a self-proclaimed alien conqueror. So, she ventured cautiously, about this conquest, what exactly does that entail? Calthorn's upper sensory cluster focused on her intently. I demonstrate superior capabilities. Your species acknowledges inevitable defeat. The Zephyrin fleet arrives. Resources are cataloged and extracted. Surviving populations are relocated or repurposed. Repurposed? Max asked, not liking the sound of that. Converted to serve the Empire's needs. And if we don't acknowledge this, inevitable defeat. Calthorn's skin darkened slightly. That outcome is not in my programming. The Vorak protocol has succeeded on 73 consecutive worlds. Max considered this information, scientist brain working overtime. But those were other worlds, with other species. Humans might react differently than you expect. Primitive species respond predictably to superior force, Calthorn stated. But there was a new note in the wind voice, something almost like uncertainty. Maybe, Max conceded. Or maybe you'd be surprised. We're pretty adaptable. As if to underscore her point, distant thunder rolled across the mountains. The approaching storm would reach them soon. I should head back to my cabin, Max said, gathering her equipment. The weather here can turn dangerous quickly. She hesitated, then added, Would you like to continue this discussion there? I have more coffee, and I'm curious about your empire. Calthorne's programming offered no protocol for accepting hospitality from a conquest subject. Yet the encounter had yielded valuable intelligence. The Predator calculated that further observation of this human might provide insight into the species' unexpected responses. I will accompany you, the alien decided. Your dwelling will serve as an adequate forward base. As they began the trek back toward Max's cabin, with the massive Predator moving with uncanny silence beside her, Max struggled to process the situation's absurdity. She'd gone looking for an invasive species for her thesis, and found an alien invader instead. Dr. Reyes would never believe this field report. Commander Zelfax paced the organic bridge, his exoskeleton clicking with each agitated step. Explain again why Calthorne has not initiated the terror phase, he demanded. Lieutenant Vextrix's skin patterns shifted nervously. The Vorak reports that it is gathering intelligence on human behavior patterns. It has made contact with a solitary female and is observing her responses. Observing. Zelfax's upper eyes narrowed dangerously. The protocol is clear. Demonstrate superior strength. Instill fear. Receive surrender. Observation is a preliminary phase only. Yes, Commander. But Calthorne indicates the human's responses are anomalous. It suggests further study before proceeding. Zelfax slammed a limb against the living console, causing it to shudder and emit a distressed harmonic. The Vorak units are not designed for extended scientific inquiry. They are weapons of psychological warfare. He turned his four eyes toward the holographic representation of Earth, rotating slowly above the command dais. Transmit override command sequence. Instruct Calthorne to terminate the observation and proceed with the demonstration phase immediately. As you command, Vextrix acknowledged, her appendages working the neural interface. After a moment, she looked up in confusion. Commander, the transmission is being refused. Impossible! The Vorak units cannot refuse direct commands. Not refused. Precisely. Delayed. Calthorne has activated the Autonomous Judgment Protocol, claiming that local conditions require adaptive strategies. Zelfax's respiratory slits flared in anger. No primitive world requires adaptation from a Vorak. Prepare a secondary drop pod. I want reinforcement units deployed by the next orbital cycle. As the orders disseminated through the ship's neural network, Zelfax returned his gaze to the blue planet. Something was interfering with established conquest procedures, and he would not tolerate deviation. The Empire's timetable would be maintained, regardless of anomalous humans. The storm broke just as Max and Calthorne reached the cabin. Rain lashed against the windows as they entered the small structure, designed more for function than comfort, but still undeniably human in its organization. Calthorne ducked to enter the doorway, sensory organs scanning every detail of the interior. The Predator noted the strange mix of primitive and sophisticated technology, handwritten notes next to a tablet computer, a microscope beside handcrafted mugs, books made of processed plant material alongside digital storage devices. It's not much, Max said, suddenly self-conscious about her living space being examined by an alien conqueror. But it works for my research. She moved to the small kitchenette and began preparing fresh coffee, finding comfort in the familiar routine despite the extraordinary circumstances. Make yourself comfortable, if you can. Calthorne stood awkwardly in the center of the room, clearly uncertain how to make comfortable in a space designed for beings half its size. Eventually, the Predator settled into a crouching position that still left its head nearly touching the ceiling. Your dwelling is inefficient, the alien observed. Minimal defenses, vulnerable to elements and predators. That's camping for you, Max replied with a shrug. The point is, to be close to what I'm studying. And the local predators, bears and mountain lions, generally leave humans alone if we're careful. Your species lives among predators without establishing dominance? Calthorne seemed genuinely perplexed. Max handed the alien a larger mug of coffee. We try for coexistence when possible. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. We're still figuring it out. Lightning flashed outside, briefly illuminating the cabin in stark white light. Thunder followed almost immediately. The electrical discharge is very close, Calthorne noted, sensory tendrils extending toward the window. Welcome to mountain storms, Max said, settling into her desk chair. They get intense up here. She took a sip of coffee, gathering her courage before continuing. So, about this conquest, I'm curious. What makes Earth valuable to your empire? What resources are you after? The direct question seemed to realign Calthorne with its mission parameters. The predator's posture straightened, and its voice took on a more formal tone. Earth possesses diverse biological materials, mineral deposits, and water reserves valuable to the Empire. Your technological development is insufficient to exploit these resources efficiently. By whose standards? Max challenged gently. We might not have interstellar travel, but we've developed sustainable technologies suited to our needs. Primitive technologies, Calthorne dismissed. Your energy sources remain primarily fossil-based. Your agriculture is inefficient. Your medicine is rudimentary. Yet we've survived and thrived as a species, Max countered. We've adapted to every environment on our planet. We're still learning, still evolving. Calthorne's skin rippled with patterns that might have indicated frustration. Learning is irrelevant. The Empire requires resources now. Zephyrin expansion waits for no species development. Max leaned forward, scientist mind fully engaged. But that's short-sighted, isn't it? If you harvest everything at once, you get a one-time payload. If you allow a species to develop sustainable methods, you could have ongoing resources without depletion. The alien went very still, sensory organs focused entirely on Max. You suggest partnership rather than conquest? I'm suggesting there might be approaches that benefit both species. That's how ecosystems work best. Symbiosis rather than parasitism. Before Calthorne could respond, a high-pitched tone emanated from the predator's body. Its skin flashed with patterns of attention, then darkened to deep crimson. What's happening? Max asked, suddenly concerned. Command transmission, Calthorne stated, voice modulations flatter than before. Instruction to terminate observation phase. Proceed with demonstration of dominance. Max felt cold fear spread through her chest. And what does that mean, exactly? Calthorne rose to its full height, head brushing the ceiling. It means our conversation must end. I must demonstrate Zephyrin superiority through force. The alien's limbs extended, bone-like protrusions emerging from its forearms, natural weapons designed for maximum psychological impact, as well as physical damage. Max stood slowly, careful to make no sudden movements. I don't think that's necessary. We've been communicating effectively without force. Protocol is clear, Calthorne stated. But Max detected a harmonic in the wind voice that hadn't been present before, something almost like reluctance. Protocols can be adapted, she suggested carefully. You said yourself you have an autonomous judgment capability. If communication is working, why switch to violence? The Predator's weapons remained extended, but it didn't advance. The Empire expects compliance with established methods. Max took a calculated risk. But the Empire isn't here right now. You are. And so far, your experience with at least one human hasn't followed predictions, has it? Lightning flashed again, illuminating the standoff within the small cabin. Thunder crashed, and in that moment, something changed in Calthorne's posture, a barely perceptible relaxation. I will delay implementation of the demonstration phase, the alien finally stated. Your responses continue to provide valuable data. Max exhaled slowly, not realizing she'd been holding her breath. "Thank you. More coffee?" The incongruity of the question seemed to momentarily confuse the predator. But after a pause, Calthorn retracted its weapons and settled back into its crouching position. "Yes, the stimulant appears to enhance cognitive function." As Max prepared another round of coffee, she realized she needed to develop a strategy quickly. Sooner or later, Calthorn would be forced to follow its programming, or its commanders would send reinforcements. Her best hope was to continue demonstrating that humans weren't what the Zephyrins thought they were. She just hoped the rest of humanity would be as adaptable as she was trying to be. The night passed in an unlikely exchange of information. Max explained her research on invasive species, drawing careful parallels to Zephyrin conquest methods, without being confrontational. Calthorn, increasingly engaged, shared details about the Empire's biological engineering and adaptive technologies. By dawn, Max had filled her tablet with notes that would revolutionize multiple scientific fields, if she lived to share them. More importantly, she sensed a growing cognitive dissonance in the predator. Calthorn's observations didn't match its programming, creating a conflict the alien was struggling to resolve. As first light spilled through the cabin windows, Max stood and stretched. "I need to check my research stations. The storm might have damaged some equipment." Calthorn, who had remained alert throughout the night, tilted its sensory cluster. "I will accompany you. Your terrain navigation may provide additional behavioral insights." They ventured out into the forest, now glistening with raindrops and morning dew. Max moved with the confidence of someone intimately familiar with the landscape, occasionally pointing out plant species or animal signs to her alien companion. "Your knowledge of local biota is extensive," Calthorn observed, as Max identified a rare alpine flower. "That's my job," she replied with a smile. "Understanding how everything fits together in this ecosystem. When something new enters the environment, an invasive species, it can disrupt the whole balance." The irony of her words wasn't lost on either of them. They reached a small ridge overlooking a valley where several of Max's monitoring stations were positioned. As she checked the first device, Calthorn suddenly went rigid, sensory tendrils extending to their full length. "What is it?" Max asked, instantly alert. "Transmission from orbit," the Predator replied, voice modulations tense. "A secondary drop pod has been deployed. Reinforcement units incoming." Max's heart sank. "More like you?" "Combat variants. Less autonomous. Programmed for direct action rather than assessment." "How long?" "Impact in approximately 4 hours. Their target zone is your population center down mountain." The small town where Max worked part-time, where she knew everyone by name and coffee preference. Panic flared briefly, before her practical nature asserted control. "Then we need to work fast," she said, surprising herself with her own calm. "Your commanders clearly don't believe one human is representative. We need to show them they're wrong about us before those reinforcements arrive." Calthorn's skin rippled with doubt. "How? The Zephyrin conquest protocol has never been successfully challenged." Max thought quickly, her mind racing through possibilities. "You've been observing me, learning about humans. Your data doesn't match your expectations, right? What if we could transmit that data directly to your commanders?" "Impossible. My observations are deemed subjective. Only demonstration phase results are considered valid evidence." "Then we'll give them a demonstration," Max said firmly. "Just not the one they're expecting." She looked up at the massive Predator, an idea forming. "Your mission is to prove humans are primitive and easily dominated. What if I could prove the opposite? That humans can adapt, can understand even an apex predator, can find alternatives to conflict?" Calthorn's sensory cluster focused intensely on her. "You would challenge me directly? The probability of your survival would be minimal." "Not a fight," Max clarified. "A different kind of challenge. one that tests intelligence, adaptability, problem-solving, the qualities that actually determine which species thrives in the long term. The alien was silent for several moments, internal calculations running behind its alien sensory organs. Finally, it spoke. Such a demonstration would be unprecedented, but potentially informative. "That's all I'm asking for," Max said. "A chance to show that Earth isn't what your empire thinks it is. That conquest might not be the most efficient approach." Calthorn's skin shifted through patterns of consideration. "What form would this challenge take?" Max gestured to the mountains around them. "This terrain. My knowledge against your capabilities. If I can evade you until sunset, using only my understanding of this ecosystem and human ingenuity. Would that demonstrate that humans aren't as primitive as your empire believes?" The Predator considered the proposal. "The parameters are unusual, but the core assessment remains valid, testing the capabilities of the dominant species. I will agree to this demonstration." "And you'll transmit the results accurately to your commanders?" "Vorak units cannot falsify mission data," Calthorn stated, almost sounding offended. "All observations are recorded objectively." Max nodded, formulating her strategy. "Then we have a deal. You'll give me a 30-minute head start. The boundaries are the river to the east, the cliff face to the north, the old mining road to the west, and the boulder field to the south." Calthorn's skin flashed acknowledgement patterns. "Agreed. Your time begins now." Without hesitation, Max shouldered her pack and set off into the forest at a steady jog. She had 30 minutes to prepare for the most important game of hide-and-seek in human history. Commander Zelfax's rage was palpable, the air around him vibrating with pheromones of displeasure that made subordinates keep their distance. "The Vorak has agreed to what?" he demanded, all four eyes fixed on Lieutenant Vextrix. "A modified demonstration phase," she replied, struggling to maintain composure. "Calthorn reports that standard terror protocols may be ineffective against this species. It has initiated an assessment of human adaptive capabilities instead." "This is unprecedented, unacceptable!" Zelfax slammed a limb against the command dais. "The reinforcement pod?" "On schedule, Commander. Impact in 3 hours, 17 minutes. Zelfax's respiratory slits flared in agitation. "Transmit emergency override. Terminate this absurd challenge immediately." Vextrix hesitated. "Commander, the Vorak has activated deep autonomous mode. Overrides are temporarily suspended while the assessment proceeds." The bridge fell silent as Zelfax's skin darkened to the dangerous shade that preceded violence in his species. Then, surprisingly, he relaxed. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "this is fortuitous. When the human inevitably fails this challenge, the psychological impact will be even greater. Their supposed adaptability will be proven worthless against Zephyrin bioengineering." He gestured to the main display. "Show me the hunt. I wish to observe this primitive's futile resistance personally." The living view screen shimmered, connecting to Calthorn's sensory feed. The commanders of the inevitable conquest settled in to watch what they assumed would be another predictable conquest demonstration. They were about to be surprised. Max moved quickly, but methodically through the forest, her mind cycling through everything she knew about the terrain and what she had learned about Calthorn. The alien was faster, stronger, and had enhanced senses. Conventional evasion wouldn't work. She needed to think like an ecologist, not a prey animal. Her first stop was a dense thicket she'd documented in her research, a patch of native shrubs with a peculiar chemical defense mechanism. When disturbed, they released compounds that temporarily overwhelmed mammalian olfactory receptors. Max had discovered this when tracking pine martens through the area. Carefully, she harvested several branches, tucking them into her pack. Next, she headed to a small stream where she'd previously documented a mineral-rich clay deposit. The substance had unusual electromagnetic properties that interfered with her research equipment's sensors. Working quickly, she gathered the clay and mixed it with water from her canteen, creating a thick paste that she applied to her exposed skin and clothing. It wouldn't hide her completely from Calthorne's sensory capabilities, but it might blur her signature enough to create confusion. 20 minutes into her head start, Max reached a rocky outcropping overlooking a section of forest she knew intimately. Her research stations created a grid through this area, and she had mapped every tree, stream, and geological feature. Here, she began implementing the core of her strategy. Using materials from her pack and the environment, Max created a series of false trails, decoys, and minor traps. Nothing lethal or even harmful. That wasn't her goal, but distractions and misdirections that would force Calthorne to question its perceptions and adapt its approach. As her 30 minutes neared its end, Max took a final, decisive action. She removed her outer jacket, rubbed it thoroughly with the aromatic shrub branches, and placed it conspicuously on a rock, as if hastily discarded. Then she doubled back along a shallow stream, careful to leave minimal signs of her passage. Her destination was a geological formation she'd documented months earlier, a small cave system created by ancient water erosion. The entrance was barely visible behind a cascade of mountain laurel, but inside, the space opened up enough for her to move comfortably. Most importantly, the cave's unusual mineral composition had interfered with her electronic equipment during previous visits. She hoped it might similarly affect Calthorne's sensory capabilities. As she settled into position, Max checked her watch. Her head start was officially over. The hunt had begun. And somewhere orbiting high above, unknown to her, an audience of Zephyrin commanders was watching with growing interest. Calthorne began tracking precisely when the agreed-upon head start concluded. The Predator's sensory systems calibrated to human biological signatures, body heat, respiration, the specific compounds in human perspiration. The hunt should have been straightforward. It wasn't. The human's trail seemed to fragment almost immediately, leading in multiple directions simultaneously. Calthorne followed the strongest signature, only to find an empty clearing with no continuation. Doubling back, the Predator detected an unusual chemical composition in the air, organic compounds that temporarily overwhelmed its olfactory receptors. Interesting. The human was using the environment itself as a defense mechanism. Switching to thermal tracking, Calthorne identified a hot spot on a nearby rocky outcropping. Approaching with predatory silence, the alien discovered only a discarded outer garment, still radiating body heat, but clearly abandoned as a decoy. More interesting still, the primitive was demonstrating tactical thinking. For the next 2 hours, Calthorne engaged in a complex pursuit across the mountain terrain. The human led the Predator through dense underbrush that slowed its larger frame, across unstable scree slopes, where weight became a disadvantage, and near the habitats of local wildlife, whose alarm calls created additional sensory distractions. Each time Calthorne adapted its approach, the human seemed to anticipate and counter with a new evasion technique, not through superior physical capabilities, but through intimate knowledge of the environment and creative problem-solving. Aboard the inevitable conquest, Commander Zelfax watched with increasing discomfort. What had begun as entertainment, observing a primitive's futile resistance, had evolved into something unprecedented. The human female was not merely fleeing. She was systematically exploiting every environmental advantage, demonstrating a level of ecological integration that challenged Zephyrin assumptions. "This is unexpected," Lieutenant Vextrix ventured cautiously. Zelfax's exoskeleton clicked in agitation. "It is one human using simple tricks against a single Vorak. The reinforcements will demonstrate the futility of such resistance on a larger scale." But his tone lacked its earlier certainty. By mid-afternoon, Calthorne had tracked Max to a stream-fed valley dense with vegetation. The Predator paused, sensory tendrils fully extended, processing the conflicting data. The human's signature seemed to be everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Then, a sound, deliberate, unmistakable. The human was calling out. "Calthorn, can you hear me?" The predator pinpointed the source, a rocky outcropping overlooking the valley. There stood Max, making no attempt to hide, silhouetted against the sky. "Your tracking abilities are impressive," she called. "But how's your climbing?" With that, she disappeared over the ridge. Calthorn immediately moved to pursue, scaling the rocky slope with impressive agility, despite its size. Cresting the ridge, the predator found itself on a narrow path along a cliff face, a natural bottleneck where its superior speed and strength offered minimal advantage. Ahead, Max stood waiting, her expression calm despite the precarious position. "We need to talk," she said simply. Calthorn paused, sensory organs scanning for traps or deception. Finding none, the predator responded. "The demonstration continues. Conversation is irrelevant." "Is it?" Max challenged. "Because from where I stand, this demonstration is proving something very different from what your empire expected." She gestured to the landscape around them. "I've survived nearly 4 hours against an apex predator, engineered specifically for hunting. Not because I'm stronger or faster, but because I understand this ecosystem. I've adapted to it, and now I'm using that knowledge creatively." Calthorn remained silent, but its skin patterns shifted in what Max had come to recognize as thoughtfulness. "Your reinforcements are coming," she continued. "They'll land near the town, where people don't have my advantages. There will be panic, fear, exactly the response your empire expects. But that's not the whole story of humanity." "Explain," Calthorn finally responded. "Fear is just one response," Max said. "We also adapt. We learn. We cooperate. Given time, humans would study your technology, your biology. We'd find weaknesses, develop countermeasures. The conquest wouldn't be quick or clean." "The Empire's resources are vast," Calthorn countered. "Resistance would be futile eventually. But costly." Max pointed out. "What if there's a better way? What if instead of conquest, we explored exchange? Your empire gets access to our resources through negotiation rather than force. We gain knowledge and technology. Both species benefit." Calthorn's skin rippled with complex patterns. "The Zephyrin Empire does not negotiate with primitive species." "Then, maybe it's time they started," Max said firmly. "Because this primitive has evaded capture by their apex predator for hours, using nothing but knowledge and ingenuity. Imagine what billions of us could do if threatened." She took a careful step forward. "The sun will set soon, according to our agreement. If I evade you until then, I've proven my point about human adaptability. But I'm willing to end the demonstration now, not in surrender, but in cooperation." For several long moments, the alien predator remained motionless, sensory organs fully focused on Max. Above them, unbeknownst to her, the commanders of a conquest fleet watched and listened with growing uncertainty. Finally, Calthorn spoke. "Your proposal contradicts established protocols." "Good," Max replied with a small smile. "Sometimes the established way isn't the best way. Adaptation means being willing to try something new when the old approach isn't optimal." Another long silence followed. Then, remarkably, Calthorn's weapons retracted fully into its forearms, a gesture Max interpreted as the alien equivalent of lowering one's guard. "I will transmit your proposal to command," the predator stated. "The demonstration phase is inconclusive." Max exhaled slowly, hope cautiously blooming. "Thank you. Now about those reinforcements." Commander Zelfax stood rigid on the organic bridge, all 4 eyes fixed on the transmission display. Around him, the command staff maintained a careful silence, awaiting his response to this unprecedented development. The reinforcement pod was 20 minutes from impact. The decision required immediate action. "This is irregular," he finally stated. "The human's performance exceeds all predictive models for primitive species." Lieutenant Vextrix approached cautiously. "Commander, preliminary analysis suggests the human's approach may have merit. Resource extraction through negotiated access could potentially yield higher efficiency than conquest and reconstruction." Zelfax's exoskeleton clicked as he processed this information. His career had been built on successful conquests. Yet the Empire valued efficiency above all. If a new approach offered better resource yields with lower expenditure. "Recalculate conquest value assessment," he ordered. "Factor in potential resistance based on observed human adaptability." The living computers pulsed as they processed the command. Moments later, the results appeared on the main display. Revised assessment. Earth classification. Upgraded to potentially hazardous conquest cost projection. 47% increase. Resource yield efficiency. 33% decrease under combat conditions. Recommendation. Reclassify as negotiation candidate. Zelfax's respiratory slits flared in surprise. The numbers were unambiguous. The Empire's protocols were clear when efficiency calculations shifted so dramatically. "Transmit abort code to reinforcement pod," he ordered. "Reroute to holding pattern, and send communication to Calthorn. The demonstration phase is complete. New directives incoming." As his commands were implemented, Zelfax turned his attention back to the image of the human female, standing fearlessly before an apex predator. Perhaps, he reflected, the Empire's definition of primitive required revision. The sun was setting over the Colorado mountains when Max and Calthorn returned to her research cabin. The alien moved with a different posture now, less predatory, more contemplative. "The reinforcements have been redirected," Calthorn informed her as they reached the clearing. "Command is reassessing Earth's classification." Max smiled with relief. "That's a start. What happens next?" "Diplomatic protocols will replace conquest procedures. A formal contact team will be dispatched." The alien's skin rippled with what might have been amusement. "They will expect coffee." "I'll stock up," Max promised, then grew serious. "And you? Will you return to your empire?" Calthorn's sensory cluster tilted in a gesture Max had come to recognize as consideration. "My mission parameters have been modified. I am to remain as a preliminary observer and consultant." "Consultant? On human behavior and ecological integration? My experiences are deemed valuable for establishing effective communication protocols." Max laughed, the sound bright in the gathering twilight. "So you're staying for research? I can relate to that." She gestured to her cabin. "I have plenty of data to analyze, and now, apparently, a co-author for my paper on invasive species interaction." "An appropriate collaboration," Calthorn agreed, its wind voice carrying harmonics that might have been humor. As they entered the cabin, Max couldn't help but reflect on the absurdity of the situation. She'd gone looking for research data and found herself negotiating humanity's first interstellar diplomatic contact. Dr. Reyes would either fail her for complete fabrication or nominate her for a Nobel Prize. More importantly, she'd discovered that sometimes the greatest defense wasn't technology or weapons, but understanding of ecosystems, of other beings, and of the delicate balance that sustained all life, even across the stars. 6 months later, Max stood before a packed university auditorium, her presentation slides displaying data that had revolutionized multiple scientific fields. Beside her, Calthorn, now equipped with a translator device that rendered its wind voice in clear English, operated the digital display with remarkable dexterity. "In conclusion," Max stated confidently, "our research demonstrates that invasive introduction doesn't necessarily lead to ecosystem collapse. With proper management and communication protocols, integration can actually enhance biodiversity and resource efficiency." The subtext wasn't lost on the audience, which included several government officials and, remarkably, 3 Zephyrin diplomatic representatives observing from the back row. As applause filled the auditorium, Dr. Reyes approached the podium, shaking her head in amazement. "When you said your field research had taken an unexpected turn, Maxine, I had no idea. This collaboration is unprecedented." Max smiled, glancing at her alien co-researcher. "It turns out we had more to learn from each other than either side expected." Calthorne's skin rippled with patterns that the humans in the room were learning to recognize as satisfaction. "The Empire's resource acquisition models have been significantly revised based on our findings. Negotiated access has proven 72% more efficient than conquest protocols." Dr. Reyes blinked, still not entirely accustomed to conversing with a 9-foot alien predator. "Well, that's excellent news for interspecies relations." Later. As they walked across the campus quad, Max and Calthorne discussed their next research project. The first official Zephyrin exchange program was preparing to launch, with Earth scientists traveling to study the Empire's bioengineering techniques while Zephyrin researchers explored Earth's biodiversity. "Your thesis advisor still appears uncomfortable in my presence," Calthorne observed. Max laughed. "Give her time. Not everyone adapts as quickly to having their worldview completely upended. Yet adaptation is your species' most remarkable trait," the alien noted. "The Empire's xenobiologists are still attempting to explain how a physically unremarkable species achieved planetary dominance. Maybe someday I'll explain coffee to them. That might clear things up." As they reached the research building that now housed the newly established Interstellar Ecological Exchange Program, Max paused to look up at the sky. Somewhere up there, the inevitable conquest had been joined by diplomatic vessels rather than the conquest fleet originally planned. All because one graduate student and one alien predator had been willing to question their programming and try something new. "You know," Max said thoughtfully, "for an apex predator sent to conquer my planet, you turned out to be a pretty good research partner." Calthorne's skin flashed with patterns that Max now recognized as the alien equivalent of laughter. "And for a primitive species, you make excellent coffee." Together, they entered the building to continue their work, proving that sometimes the most effective invasive species management strategy was simply to sit down, share a beverage, and talk. The Zephyrin Empire had called Earth primitive, but in the end, their apex predator had fallen before a 25-year-old human girl with a thermos of coffee and the adaptability that defined her species. And both worlds were better for it.